Hello, and welcome to this edition of According to the Scriptures. You know, millions of Christians are in the dark on the subject of tithing, and as a result, they're literally throwing their money away. The subject of tithing is based solely on two Old Testament passages, and a simple reading of these two passages make it not a little clear, not even real clear, or in fact, not even crystal clear. These two passages, a simple reading of it, make it ultra crystal clear that tithing has never had anything whatsoever to do with Christians who are under the new covenant. As a result, they are literally throwing their money away. And the same can be said of the modern invention known as or called New Testament giving. A simple reading of the only New Testament passage that is cited in support of this, or in an attempt to support this modern invention, makes it ultra crystal clear that Paul is not referring to supporting your congregation and paying the pastor's salary. So why don't you join with me and listen to the Word of God speak for itself with very little of my exegesis or exposition, and look at the slide presentation that I have prepared for you. So why don't you join me? As I mentioned at the outset, the biblical ordinance of tithing is based on two Old Testament passages, and they are Deuteronomy chapter 14 and Numbers chapter 18. And what you will find from a simple reading of the first passage is that there are not one, but two Old Testament tithing ordinances. The first one is recorded in verses 23 through 27 of Deuteronomy 14. The second one is recorded in the last two verses in the chapter, verses 28 and 29. And many Christians will be surprised to learn this, that there are two tithing ordinances. So let's look at the first one. The first one is an annual tithe. Listen to the Word of God speak for itself on this subject in this passage. Deuteronomy 14:22 reads, "You shall surely tithe all of the produce from what you sow, which comes out of the field every year." So the first thing that we learn is an axiom. Most Christians are aware that the term tithe means 10%. The second thing that you'll notice is that the tithe consisted of produce rather than money. Thirdly, we learned, and more importantly, is that the tithe was held every year. So therefore it was an annual event. So the ancient Israelites were required to bring the tithe annually, once a year, and so certainly not 52 times a year. Christians should find this even more striking, and it was produce, not money. So the passage clearly indicates that the tithe consisted of 10% of the best produce, that is the grain, produce, olive oil, and wine. The next verse lays this out rather clearly in words that simply cannot be misunderstood. Notice, "And you shall eat in the presence of Yahweh your God at the place where he chooses to establish his name, the tithe of your grain, your new wine, your oil, and the firstborn of your herd and your flock, so that you may learn to fear Yahweh your God always." So the tithe consisted of 10% of the best produce and livestock. So tithing is not money. Instead, it is food. There is another feature in the biblical teaching of tithing, though this time money does enter the picture for the very first time, though it is not to pay the pastor's or priest's salary, but is to be spent on oneself for the Israelite. Verse 24, "If the distance is so great for you that you are not able to bring the tithe, since the place where Yahweh your God chooses to set his name is too far away from you, when Yahweh your God blesses you," verse 25, "then you shall exchange it for money, and bind the money in your hand, and go to the place which Yahweh your God chooses." So Yahweh decreed that the poor Israelites, those who were poverty-stricken, were permitted to sell their tithe, their best produce and livestock, in exchange for money, so that the poor Israelite and his entire family could attend the annual event. Verse 26, "And you may spend the money for whatever your heart desires, for oxen, or sheep, or wine, or strong drink, or whatever your heart desires. And there you shall eat in the presence of Yahweh your God, and rejoice, you and your household. All of this clearly indicates that the annual tithe was a time of feasting, not paying the pastor's salary or meeting the needs of the congregation. Now, at this stage in the narrative, we come to a major feature in the annual tithing ordinance, and it relates to the Levitical priest. Deuteronomy 14:27 reads, "Also you shall not neglect the Levite who is in your town, for he has no portion or inheritance among you." As we shall see, this text reveals that the priests were underprivileged, and I'll show you why. The land of Canaan was divided into 12 parts, corresponding to the 12 tribes of Israel. Actually 13, because the tribe of Manasseh was divided in two because they were twice the size as the rest of the tribes. As a result, the Levites did not receive a parcel of land as property for a home. The Levites were not granted a parcel of land and were prohibited from having a proper living structure for a house. So you will notice that you will not find a parcel of land on any map of the Promised Land with the name Levite on it. Instead, they were allotted what were known as 48 Levitical cities, or more precisely, villages. You find this in Numbers 35:7, 48 of them. So the Levites lived in tents throughout ancient Israel. This was in place of a proper living structure or house. Therefore, in place of the house, they received the annual tithes as gifts in place of a house. So what you would see from an aerial view of Canaan would be something like this. Because they did not own a parcel of land, they were forbidden to have a house to live in. Yahweh decreed that they would be provided with 10% of the best produce and livestock as gifts, not a salary. Well, that's it for now. We will explore this further. We will see you again as we continue this biblical study series on tithing and the modern church invention called New Testament giving. So until then, this is Angel Ariano Jr. reminding you to remember to always do all things according to the Scriptures.